Hello everyone, and welcome to this DOM Labs tutorial. In this tutorial, I'm going to be teaching you how to make Breakout, the game where you hit a ball with a paddle and try to break all of the blocks. Right now, let's create a 2D object, a sprite, and then a square. I'm going to name this the paddle. I'm going to reset the transform, move it down, and then scale it a bit smaller on the Y, and then more on the X, something like 2 and 0.5. Now, once we have the paddle, I'm going to make the ball. I'm going to create a 2D object, a sprite, and then a circle. I'm going to name it ball. Then I'm also going to reset the transform, and then change the scale down to something like 0.5. Now that the scale is set, I'm going to move it down just right in front of the paddle right here. Then I'm going to take the paddle and change the scale to something like 3 to make it just a little bit bigger. Now on the paddle, I'm going to add a box collider 2D and a rigid body 2D. Then I'm going to set the gravity scale to 0 on the rigid body 2D. I'm going to do the same for the ball, add a circle collider 2D, and then also add a rigid body 2D, and change the gravity scale to 0. Now, to make the ball bounce, I'm going to need to create a physics material 2D. So down here in my assets folder, I'm going to create a physics material 2D. I'm going to name this bouncy. Then I'm going to change the friction to 0 and bounciness to 1. Then on the ball, the material for the rigid body 2D, I'm going to drag in bouncy. Now, once that's good, I'm going to go to the paddle, add a new script, and I'm going to name this movement. This is going to be the movement of the paddle. Now I'm going to open this up in Microsoft Visual Studio, but you can open it up in whatever coding editor you choose. Now once we're in here, I'm going to define a public float. I'm going to name this speed. Then inside of update, I'm going to create another float, name it xMove, set it equal to input.getAxis raw, and then horizontal. This gets the horizontal axis. Then I'm going to get another public rigid body 2D and name it rigid body. This is going to be a reference to the rigid body that is on our player. So I'm going to do rigid body dot velocity, or linear velocity, is set to a new vector 2. It's going to be xMove times speed and then 0. Now this makes our paddle move left and right. I'm also going to get a public, it's going to be a float, and I'm going to name this boundary. Now I'm going to check if our transform dot position dot x is greater than boundary. Then I'm going to set our transform dot position dot x equal to boundary. And it's saying we cannot change it, so I'm going to set this equal to just the transform dot position equal to a new vector 2, and it's going to be it's going to be boundary and then transform dot position dot y. Now I'm going to do another if statement and check if our transform dot position dot x is less than negative boundary. Then I'm going to do a transform dot position equals a new vector 2. It's going to be negative boundary, and then transform dot position dot y. Now this just keeps our paddle within a boundary. So I'm going to go back to this, and on the paddle, I'm going to drag the rigid body right here, change the speed to something like 5, and then I'm going to move this paddle right here. And if I look right here, you can see that the position is -7. So what I'm going to do is set the boundary to 7.5, because it's also on the same on the other side. If I go here, that's 7.5. So now if I just click the play button, I'm going to be able to move my paddle and it will stay on the edges of the screen, which is what we want. So now we need to get the ball moving. So I'm going to create on the paddle or the ball, I'm going to add a new script and I'm going to name this ball movement. Now inside of this script, inside of start, I'm going to call a method that I haven't created yet, so I'm going to create it. It's going to be a void, and then this method is going to be called start ball move. This will send the ball off in a random direction. So I'm going to call start ball move right there. Now inside of start ball move, what's going to happen, I'm going to need a public rigid body, and I'm going to name this rigid body. It's going to be a rigid body 2D. Now inside the rigid body 2D, or inside the start ball move, I'm going to get the X move is going to be equal to a random dot range between a 0 and 2, and if it is 1, and then if this is greater than 1, we're going to set it to 1, if not 0. This is going to be a float. And then I'm going to copy this for the Y move. And then I'm going to set a vector 2, name it direction, set this equal to a new vector 2. That's X move times Y move. And then I'm going to get another public float, name this speed, and then multiply this vector by speed. Now what this does is it checks for a random range between 0 and 1, and if it is greater than 1, we're going to set it to 1, and if not, it's going to be 0. That's what this question mark and colon is for. So that's what this does. I'm going to need to create boundaries once we're back inside of here. So I'm going to create an empty game object, name this boundary, and then reset this transform object on it. Then I'm going to add a box collider 2D. Then I'm just going to quickly change these values so that it is on the side right there. Move it up and all the way to the bottom. Then I'm going to do this again, so I'm going to do Command D, and then I'm going to move it over to the side so that it's right there. Then I'm going to do the same thing, Command D, move it, and then change these vertices right here, move it up, just like that. Then if I hover over it, you can see that it's all like that. Now I'm going to go click the play button. Now what's going to happen is the ball is not going to move because these two values are both always going to be 0. So I'm going to change that and then just set X move equal to a 1, then Y move equal to 1 as well. I'm getting errors here because I'm just going to need to do floats. Let's go type a rigid body dot linear velocity is equal to a new, or I'm just going to set it equal to direction. We don't have to do a new vector 2 with direction.x and direction.y because we're already multiplying it by the speed right here. So now if we go back inside of Unity and we go back inside of play mode again, what will happen is our ball will move. You can see it's bouncing around and it is bouncing this paddle around, which is something that should not happen, but that is because this paddle, we need to change the constraints and freeze rotation on the z-axis. So now let's create a 2D object, a sprite, and then a square. I'm going to name this a block. I'm going to just change it a little bit to be a little bit more like that, change the scale on the y to 0.5, and then the scale to x to 1.5. Now this block I'm going to just change to a color. I'm just going to pick an orange color. And then I'm going to place it right here, and then duplicate it, and duplicate it again, until I have 3. Then highlight all these, duplicate them, and then I'm going to highlight all of these blocks, and then duplicate them once more. So now if I highlight all of these blocks, I'm going to just center them just right there. Now if I go to the game view, you can see this is how they look. Now inside of the ball move script, I'm going to delete the update method and then add an on collision enter 2D method. Now I'm going to check if the collision.gameObject.tag is equal to block, and if it is, I'm going to destroy collision.gameObject. And then we can go back inside of Unity, and then once this compiles, we are going to add the block tag to all of the blocks. So this block, I'm going to add a tag. I'm going to name this tag block, and then add it to every single block. So I'm going to highlight and then add block. Now you can see what happens is that when I go into play mode, my ball is going to shoot off, and it's not going to do because these blocks, they do not have a box collider on them. So we can change that by just adding a simple box collider 2D to them. Now also this paddle, I can just freeze the Y position so it won't move. And now if we click the play button, what's going to happen is that's going to happen. It's going to shoot off, hit those blocks, and then the ball went away. What I'm going to do is just change the speed to 5. And then now I'm going to create another mono behavior script, and I'm going to name this score. So now this score class is going to hold the player score. So I'm just going to get a public float, and I'm going to name it player score. Now inside the ball movement, I'm going to get a reference to this. So I'm going to do a public score. Now whenever we destroy a block, I'm going to do score dot player score plus plus. So I'm going to add 1 to it. You can add 1 or 2 or whatever you really want to. But also I'm going to up at the top type using TM Pro, and then I'm also going to get a public text mesh pro UGUI, and I'm going to name it score text. Instead of update, I'm going to set score text equal to score plus player score.to string. This just sets the player text score to score and then that, which will update whenever we hit one of these balls. So what we can do is let's go create that score text. So I'm going to create a UI canvas and name it score canvas. And now this canvas, I'm going to create a UI text mesh pro. You are going to have to download text mesh pro if you do not have it inside of your project, but I do. So I do not have to download it in this project. The text I'm going to name score text. And then I'm going to change the font of this text to black. I'm going to change the font size to 56. Align it in the middle center. Make it a bit bigger. And then I'm going to go up here and anchor it. So I'm going to click Shift Alt and then move it over there. So now if I go to the game, you can see the score text is right there. Now if I click the play button, what we're going to have to do is actually first create an empty game object, name this score, add the score component to it, the score text, we're going to drag that right in there, and then the ball, it's going to look for score, so let's just drag the score right there. Now we can click the play button, and what's going to happen is the ball is going to shoot off. I can hit it, and you can see my score is updating. And you can see that this game is Breakout. This is this game with the ball moving and hitting all of these things. But we can add something else. We should add lives. You can see that once the ball goes below here, nothing's going to happen. It's just going to fall away forever. So let's go into the ball movement script, and then we're going to check inside of update. So let's get the update function back in. So we're going to check if our transform.position.y is less than 0. And I'm just going to quickly check by going to the paddle. You can see that the position.y is -4. I'm going to set it to -6. So if it is less than -6, then I'm going to call I'm going to create a void. I'm going to name it restart game. Now, when we restart the game, I'm going to set score.playerscore equal to 0. I'm going to start the ball move. I'm going to call that function, and it's getting an error because we have to put the equal sign. And now I would like to put the ball and paddle back to their normal positions. So I'm going to set transform.position equal to, what is it right now? It is at x0 and y -3. So I'm going to set a new vector 2, 0, -3. And now I'm going to do the same for the paddle. So let's get a reference to the paddle. We're going to get a public transform. I'm going to name this paddle. Now I'm going to set the paddle.transform.position equal to a new vector 2. Now in this vector 2, this paddle is at x0 and y -4. So I'm going to do that, -0 and then -4. And now we have to reset all of these blocks. But what we can do is just test this quickly. So if this is going to happen, I'm going to do a restart game. So now if we go back inside of Unity, once Unity compiles, I'm going to go back inside and click the play button. And now what's going to happen is if it goes there, it's going to fall off. And now it's going to restart. And it's giving us a no reference exception. And that's because inside of our ball, we have not assigned the paddle. So I'm just going to drag the paddle down right there. And then I'm going to click play again just to test this. Now the ball is going to go there, and now it will bounce down. And now it's starting again. You can see the score is resetting to 0, but these blocks are not resetting, which we can easily fix by, instead of doing all of this, we can use a script for it. If you would just like to manually place them, you do not have to watch this part of the video, and you can skip to the end. But I'm going to do this with a script. So I'm going to create a MonoBehavior script, and I'm going to name this grid. This grid script, I'm going to get a few variables. First one will be a public game object. I'm going to name this block. Now, I'm going to create a void, and I'm going to name this create grid. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a for int x is equal to 0, x is less than 8 or 6, then x plus plus. Then I'm going to do a for int y is equal to 0, y is less than 3, and then y plus plus. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a game object block is equal to instantiate the block at a new vector 2, and it's going to be x, y. And then the quaternion dot identity. And I'm gonna need to rename this. I'm gonna name this object, or just obj for short. Now this is just creating a new block at these positions. So now, inside of start, I'm going to call the create grid function, and inside of ball movement, I'm going to get a public grid. I'm going to name it grid, and then right in restart game, I'm going to do grid dot create grid, but I need to make this a public function first. So grid dot create grid. So now this is all that's good. Now what's going to happen is when we go back inside of Unity, we're going to need to create a object. I'm going to name this grid, add the grid component to it. For these blocks, I'm going to delete all these blocks, drag this one down to make a prefab out of it, delete the prefab. For the grid, I'm going to drag this prefab right in here. And the ball is going to need a reference to this grid. The ball will need a reference to this grid. So now, if I click play, it's going to create a grid for us. But it will not be centered, just look like this. So what we will need to do is inside of grid, I'm going to need to create a public float, and I'm going to name this spacing. Then I'm going to do new vector x plus spacing, x plus spacing, y plus spacing. And then now I'm actually going to add this transform right under here. This parameter is what these objects should be created under, and I would like them to be created under the grid transform object. What we're going to do is do the x times spacing and then the y times spacing as well. Now what will happen is if I make spacing something like 1.5 again, because 3 might be a bit much, I'm going to change it to 1.5. Now if I click play, what will happen is that they will be all spaced out, or not spaced out because they're all that. I'm going to change it to 2. And then I'm also going to move the grid over, just like that. So now if I click the play button, they will be spaced apart and right there. You can see that they aren't all moved, so I need to move it just a little bit more. So I'm going to move it just a little bit more. But now the problem is that when we play, the grid is not destroying itself. So I'm going to need to create a public list of game objects, and I'm going to name this blocks, is equal to a new list of game objects. And I am getting an error here because I am not using systems.collections. So I'm going to do using system.collections.generic. Now that gets rid of the error. Now whenever I call create grid, I'm going to do a for int I is equal to 0, 0, I is less than blocks.count, and then this, I'm going to blocks.remove block at I, and then I'm going to destroy blocks at I. I'm actually going to do this first, or else it will not exist after we remove it. So now this destroys all of these blocks. Now what we need to do right here is right after we get this object, I'm going to do blocks.add in that object. And now what's happening right here is that it's placing it in world position, but I would like to put it in child position. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do object.transform.child or .position or local position, and I'm going to set this equal to a new vector 2. I'm going to just copy this over and paste it right here. Now that's that code, and now it should set this local position to that instead. So now what's going to happen is that if I go into play mode, these objects will appear. They are going to appear right there, because I'm going to need to just move the grid, and now get out of play mode, move the grid to that position again. You can mess around with that and get it to where you want. Now when I click the play button, this game will start. You can see that the grid is right there, and I can play Breakout. I hope you enjoyed this Unity tutorial. If you did, please give our channel a like and a subscribe because it really helps out a ton. Thank you.